On the 20th of September, I attended a screening of the documentary film released earlier this year titled The Encampments. The screening doubled as a fundraiser event for the legal defense of UCID academics Nick Rima and John Keane, who have been, in my opinion, smeared as committing hate speech for criticizing the actions of a federal government. Nick and John spoke to the gathered audience after the film in a conversation and then Q&A moderated by the great man Ahmed Alabadla. I had the pleasure of taking one of Rima's classes when I was a first-year university student, and it was, in a sense, nice to see him and interact with him again, although I wish it were under less depressing, less mortifying circumstances. I've posted a link to where one can donate to their defense fund. It is the top community post on this channel and will remain so for as long as it needs to be. I had the great pleasure of meeting and engaging in a very moving conversation with John Keane, who happened to be seated right near me during the screening, an incredible person to talk with, not a hateful bone in his skeletal system, though lots of admirable conviction. He recommended I read more Kafka. I, the pitiful film nerd that I am, mentioned that I'd at least seen the Orson Welles trial film, and he believed that the novel was far more impactful, or inferred as much. My opinion on the film itself, The Encampments, I found it a very powerful and informative work. It was a case wherein I was inevitably thinking of what its inevitable potential anyway. Detractors, as there always is when media related to this conflict and this side of the conflict is concerned, would claim it is whitewashing, who is secretly funded by Hamas or Qatar, what these people really think. They say one thing and giggle behind closed doors, claiming another thing. They're advocating for violence. They want to wipe a certain country off the map. I do find certain objections to the one-state solution to be understandable, and the insistence of a Jewish state or Jewish religious state is not a horrible ideal in and of itself, absolutely in its execution, I feel. But then as an Australian, I don't feel as though we all ought to just dissolve what we've established currently. So there's no need for me to feel that way about Israel as a sovereign state. In an ideal world, we'd all be okay with a two-state solution. Some insist on one because they don't believe in ethno-nationalist states, religious states, or believe the Israeli state body was so catastrophic as to justify some form of restart for a nation in that region, a secular, multi-ethnic population. I'm for whatever would prevent the most suffering and violence going forward. I'm willing to hear both sides of that debate. Again, I will insist that if instead of Israel we had, via some near-identical alternate timeline, a neo-crusader radical Catholic state committing these heinous crimes against Palestinian Muslim Arabs, the reaction from nearly all of these protesters would be the exact same. The idea that this is uniquely being denounced due to the involvement of Jewish people is confusing to me. I don't think this would be different if it were another group of people killing another group that the Western developed world governments were funding without any conscience or care, apparently. Some cry that those who denounce Israel do not speak up against atrocities occurring in other Middle Eastern nations on the African continent, or against the Russian aggressive invasion of the Ukraine, and frankly, even the Turkish violence against the Kurds is not at the current scale of the slaughtering in Gaza, and while a Saudi massacring of Yemenis was certainly funded by the US, no pundits were around defending it. There are quite numerous for the Israeli government's not dissimilar, I feel, behaviour. The violence in Sudan, say, right now, is certainly not being bankrolled by the American state apparatus and other Western nations, such as my own, shamefully, the Australian Labour government, and everyone condemns the Russian invasion, and extensive boycotts exist upon the Russian state, and I believe rightfully so. The reaction against Israel's violence is certainly provoked by the odd gaslighting to insist that their behaviour is somehow just by comparison to these other unanimously condemned evils across the globe. The fundamental belief I hold regarding these student encampments is, though I do support their cause and think the scale of the repulsive violence does justify such an outcry and assertive civil resistance such as which the subjects commit to, the fundamental belief I will stand by to all the detractors is that I feel as though it should be in their free speech rights. Unless you on the other side are willing or want to shut down the opposite existing, a Zionist Israeli group championing their preferred cause in this continuing atrocity, and I can't see why you can oppose these groups and their actions. Let me go on further. Is it not permitted to plot the overthrow of the US government under American law? This doesn't appear to be a myth. Brandenburg v. Ohio, 1969, appeared to conclude the constitutional guarantees of free speech and free press do not permit a state to forbid or proscribe advocacy of the use of force or of law violation, except where such advocacy is directed to inciting or producing imminent lawless action. If you want to argue that the student encampments committed that latter portion, go ahead, but do make very sure you are consistent with your beliefs. Would you shut down pro-IRA groupings or pro-ANC gatherings, or those with genuine extremist or hyper-nationalist religious convictions? Many believe that fascists have a right to free speech. Many of those are on the right, and I'm not being facetious when I say that. Many civics, sort of mostly centrist right types, believe that fascists should be allowed free speech. I'm not at all being snarky or hackly coy here, sincerely. And so, by that token, shouldn't advocating for certain forms of political violence, which I think it is a major stretch really to say that the encampments were advocating for that at all, certainly not at an institutional or systemic level. Fringe instances might always exist, but the core of the group's mission cannot be judged by these figures, I feel. And at worst, you might insist that they are just naive, and really, I do not think that they are being at all naive. Are the likes of Max Blumenthal, Mark Ames, Anthony Lowenstein, Aaron Mate, Alan Pappy, Rich Forer, Omer Bartov, Peter Beinart, and Adar Weinreb all wrong or lying or somehow misguided? And finally, regarding the encampments, is it that difficult to fathom that some people might feel disgust at the Israeli violent response to the October 7th terrorist barbarism and not feel the need or submerged urge to want to slaughter the Israelis in turn? I don't understand the other side of this debate, or even why there is even a grotesque future debate about this utterly sickening mass cleansing campaign in the bloody first place.